You're listening to Up An Octave, a podcast by Sonivia, the podcasting agency that believes that women and non-binary people deserve to take up space in the podcasting industry because our thoughts, voices, and stories matter. Here you'll learn how to make dope podcasts that inspire, educate, convert, and most importantly, make your voice shine. I'm your host, Rue Spence, and I'm here to take podcasting up an octave. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Up An Octave. Today, we are going to talk about something a little controversial that may ruffle some feathers and be hard to swallow. We're going to be talking about why I actually celebrate your first negative review. But before we get into it, if you are here because it's Tuesday and you're used to spending your Tuesdays with me, hey, hi, thanks for being here. But if you have found this episode because you've gotten your first negative review and you're looking for some support or ways to cope with that, I just want to take a minute and say, I've been there, I get it, and it doesn't make you any less of a podcaster, and it doesn't mean that your podcast sucks. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about what it actually means and why it might be a good thing. So to get started, let's figure out and break down different types of negative reviews, because I believe that there are kind of two different sorts of 1 stars or negatives or whatever that might look like. I think that there is constructive criticism, and then I think there are people who are just being nasty for no reason. So if you're actually getting some constructive criticism, if you're getting someone who's saying, I want to like this, but I feel like they're doing XYZ wrong, or this doesn't work for me, that gives you a chance to improve. If they're saying, the content's great, but I can't understand them because their audio sucks, that's hurtful because you want to make that impact. You don't want to hear that something that you're doing isn't working or sucks or whatever that is, but there are action steps that you can take. If there are people who are just saying, oh, this is garbage for whatever reason. Okay, thanks. Like, that doesn't actually do anything. And honestly, and not to sound too much like a mother, it tells you more about them than about yourself. Part of the reason why I value any kind of negative feedback, though, is because it always tells me that you are like right on the precipice of some growth. Because chances are, unless you have really terrible friends and family, which I hope is not the case, those are not going to be the people leaving you hateful comments or 1-star reviews. So what I always see when someone gets their first negative review is that their podcast is being seen and heard by people outside of their circle. And this is exciting. You are finding new ears who clearly are not in alignment with you, but that means that you are closer to finding people who are in alignment with you. This gives you a chance to dial in and find out how to connect with the right audience instead of the audience that might leave you some nasty thoughts. I'll also say that when I do see a negative review as a listener, I'm nosy, so I just like to see what people are saying, what's not working. I do the same thing when I'm purchasing a product. I like to see, okay, the 5-star reviews say this, that's awesome, but give me like the down and dirty. And sometimes I find that the 1-star reviews make me want to listen even more. That those are the reviews that tell me that this show is in alignment based on who hates it. So if I see a bunch of 1-star reviews that are like, this is just woke, liberal, leftist, snowflake garbage. Okay, so as a woke, liberal, leftist snowflake, I'm over here like, okay, I'm hooked. Sign me up. This is the show I want to listen to. I see sometimes, these really polarizing shows. Maybe they're political in nature, or maybe they just espouse values of being good people. And that's, getting review bombed, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That, that's where I see the opportunity for that to be where you are dialing in with the right people. Because if all of the hateful comments are not the audio quality sucks, but they're just, oh, they think that whatever political view insert here is bad, I'm like, okay, actually, I'm really on board with that. I do think that we should feed people and gay people should exist and all of those things. And so when I do see that, it helps me connect. It helps me know, even without listening, it's almost like free advertising. The 1-star review can do your marketing for you. And so while it's semi-important to have a high rating, this is not Uber. If you have a 4.9, nothing bad happens to you. If you have a 3.8, nothing really bad happens to you. But it is so easy to get into your head about it. So really briefly, I do want to talk about how you can find the right audience. And it's kind of one of those, if you're on TikTok, you'll see people who are like, interact with this if you are on my side of TikTok, quote unquote, because I've gotten into the hands of the wrong side of the algorithm and I'm getting a lot of hate. Try and spend time where the people you would like to be listening and engaging are spending their time, whether that's social media or in person. We've got other episodes on how to find out where your target market is spending their time and how to use Instagram. And there's definitely more social media episodes coming. But, make sure that you are dialed in to where your ideal listener is hanging out so that you're hopefully not spending time or being found by your not ideal listener. As I mentioned, I do want to briefly talk about review bombing because especially if you are a polarizing show, this can happen. And review bombing, if you're not familiar with the terminology, is where hateful people, I'm going to call a duck here, hateful people will say to their friends, to their community, let's go dog on this person's show. This person is, whatever, woke, liberal, whatever. That's the example I'm going to make because that's probably what would happen to me if I got review bombed. They'd be like, oh, she thinks non-binary people are valid and have things that are worth saying on podcasts. And so, they'll kind of tell their friends and get in their little Facebook communities. And that's where you might see a deluge of negativity, right? And so that can be very, very difficult to stomach because it can make you feel unsafe. It can make you feel, like it's not worth it. And like, if you're not finding the right audience, why do you even continue to say what you're saying? And I hear that. I get that. But what I will say is that is really pretty blatant when it does happen. And to anyone who has been a conscious podcast consumer, they can see what that is. It's like the phony like Facebook reviews that you'll see of a location where you can tell that the person's never even been there, right? And so the same is true for review bombing for podcasts. I can tell just by looking at the reviews if they're all this sucks. That's not a real listener. If you can give thoughtful feedback, if you can say the audio quality is a bit dodgy, if you can say the intro music's too loud, right? That tells me you're a conscious consumer, that you are listening, but just boo, this sucks. That doesn't really do a lot. And so even as someone who might be using the reviews to see if a podcast is right for me, I kind of throw this sucks out the window. The same as when I'm purchasing a pair of pants online. If the only comments are, didn't fit well, but there's no shape and size qualifiers for, the person is 5'7" and, 140 pounds or whatever, that doesn't tell me anything because maybe you are 4'11" and 89 pounds and it didn't fit for you because it's a tall and curvy brand and it would fit me much better. But if you can say specifically, oh, these shrunk immediately the first time I put them in the washer, that tells me something. Same with podcasting. So, try and give your reviews a grain of salt, that they don't matter that much to the right people. So even if you are in a place right now where you're like, oh, I really feel like crap because I'm getting, some negativity, or maybe this one episode resonated wrong with the wrong people, they're not going to be that big of a deal unless those people are providing conscious feedback. Now, you can kind of take a boots on the ground approach to this. I will say I'm a firm believer in not feeding trolls, and that is coming from a recovering troll petting zoo, feed the animals enclosure runner. I am a recovering Facebook fighter, which is not an admirable trait, but I am who I am. And it's hard for me not to say, oh yeah, well, but engagement is engagement to a certain point. And so I'm just, when I see reviews that are a little unsavory, but not, harmful, I'm like, okay, well, thanks for taking the time out of your day. That's kind of the approach that I take. I've gotten a lot of negative traction. Last summer on Instagram was an interesting time for me. I kept getting found by 18-year-old boys. And I checked all of their profiles and they all had dead fish in their cover photos. And it was a very certain demographic of young men. And they were so bothered by the content that I was creating, which has always been, hey, I think women deserve to have access to make really good podcasts. And that was so bothersome to these individuals. And I was just, every reel found them, because partially how social media and to some extent how podcasting works, depending on where you're finding your podcasts. When you engage with something, it shows you more of that because interaction tells the algorithm that you like it. And so every time I post a reel, these guys were like, oh, you're ugly and you have bad teeth, or shut up was my favorite. Not everyone needs a podcast was another favorite. That, I just kind of learned to take it in stride. And if you are someone who has experienced vitriol in any capacity in your life, you're familiar with it. And that's not to say that it should be that way, but you probably have at least somewhat durable skin towards it. I was someone who was pretty catastrophically bullied in school. I had queer parents, and growing up in a queer household, exploring my own sexuality, I was rife for the pickin' for the Bible Belt in the early 2000s. It was a gnarly time for me. And so I have some armor now at almost 30 that when I see people who say, not everyone needs a podcast, I'm like, okay, bud, good for you. And so I just encourage you to start building up some of those walls. You are putting yourself out there as a podcaster, and that unfortunately does make you vulnerable to receive some of this. All of that was to say, I'm not a huge fan of feeding the trolls, of engaging with that, but there are some things that you can do that still feel in alignment if you don't want to feed the trolls. You can ask your community. You can say, hey, we've gotten found by some people who are very much not in alignment with our mission. So now more than ever, it is so helpful to us if you could please leave a review, tell them where, walk them through how, help them feel like they're helping you, not just by, oh yeah, reviews get us found, but especially if it's one of those, oh, this is woke liberal garbage. If you can use the passion that your listeners probably have when they hear things like that, if you can inspire them to take up those arms on your behalf, that can be more impactful than just saying hey, leave us a review. It can also give you an opportunity to make a statement without acknowledging it too much. I would not say if you're going to make a Instagram post or a Facebook post, not to say oh, all these trolls have been dragging our reviews down and, now our rating's a 3.7 or whatever. I would use a statement to illuminate the good, to crowd out the negative. I would make a statement, thank you so much to the people who get it. The girlies who get it, and say, because of your support, I know that what I'm doing matters. Because of your support, I feel seen and I feel like this content is helpful to people or is engaging or entertaining or whatever the goal of your show is. I think that's a more impactful way to handle it, by illuminating the good that does surround your show. And I think it's good, A, for not feeding the trolls, but also B, for reminding yourself that those things are true. That yes, you are getting negative reviews, but this good community does exist and is supporting you and holding you up. And it can be especially tough when you're getting started. When you get that first bummer, that sucks. That sucks. I remember so well the first time that I got a DM letting me have it for my first show. And my first show, we did like true crime and paranormal, and it was very important to us to try and handle true crime with empathy and to keep ethics at the front of it. I think there's a lot of like really voyeuristic true crime, and we definitely wanted to avoid that. And so part of that was speaking up for issues that mattered to us was something that felt very important. And we got started during the summer of 2020, and there was a lot going on that we wanted to talk about, especially as we gained any sort of platform. And so I remember this person came into my DMs and just wrote this diatribe. I took a few minutes to go back and look at it. And this was like 6 months after we'd gotten started. And I actually want to read some excerpts. There's some halting in your delivery. For our very first episode, she was like, I'm going to talk about your very first episode, which if you are someone who is just getting started, your very first episode is never going to be your favorite. Even my first episode of this show as a seasoned podcaster and podcasting professional makes me feel a little squidgy. So yes, I almost assure you that there will be some halting in your delivery. And especially when you're making a statement, which during our first episode, we wanted to talk about the things that we were seeing. We wanted to set the tone for our show and talk about why in the summer of 2020, we wanted to talk about any of the negative and not so good things about humanity, when, my God, the mirror was held up and there was plenty of not so good stuff about humanity. Very loud. So what else? At 5 minutes in, I'm ready to bolt because I don't want to hear about activism. It's like, okay, well, then this is not the true crime show for you. And then when I see that this episode is 98 minutes, I was annoyed a little that I clicked on it at all. Now, because you're a fantastic writer, I'm going to stay as long as I can stand it. We'll see how long that is. This is just turning into like Reed's mean tweets. So this is like a separate message now. I want you to say what you're going to do it, and tell me what you did at the beginning, middle, and end of the podcast, and also of each show. The talking was better when the episode actually started, but there was enough silliness that my attention divided right away. Just cut and edit it into separate podcasts. Also, if you want to keep it as one podcast, you limit your audience to people not only open to both, but people who are willing to spend their time listening to all of it. Yeah? When you are conversational, you want to stay on topic. It's fun and good to have a funny tangent, but one blip or two, not too much time on that. Your co-host's voice goes too far on the spectrum. Does she need a different mic? Which that's really interesting feedback because I have no idea what the spectrum is, but that is actually really actionable. And I just zoned out for 5-ish minutes. Oh, man. This, I will say, part of the reason why I wanted to read this, even if it's a mean tweet style, is obviously I can laugh it off now, but this was heavy when I first read it because it was something so close to my heart, so close to my co-host's heart. I remember calling her up and we were like, so this just happened. And, it's funny now, but the biggest takeaway for me is that all of the things that did not work for this person are things that worked so well for our fans. They knew that we were going to talk about activism. They knew that we were going to chat with each other. The whole point of that show started as a way for us to keep in touch. And, I was living overseas. And so that's really where the heart of that show came from. And we were very out loud about that. And so there was a lot of just banter and silliness and fun. And so the things that don't work for some people are going to be your superpower for others. And so that's why I talk so much about authenticity and making the show that you want to make, because there are going to be people who will read you for filth about why your show sucks or isn't good or whatever that I zoned out for 5 minutes and I almost clicked off and it's too long. And you're going to get that criticism no matter what you do. And that's just how it goes, unfortunately. So make the show that you want to make and trust that the people who want to listen are on their way to you. Psst. Hi, I'm interrupting the show to tell you about something special, a chance for us to connect one-on-one. Whether you're thinking about starting a podcast and aren't quite sure where to begin, or maybe you've got a show already, but you're not sure how to grow, I want to let you know about my free consultations. Yep, that's right. Absolutely free. No strings attached, no pressure, just a chance to chat with your fairy pod mother, that's me, about turning your podcast dreams into reality. You'll walk away from our conversation with actionable steps to take, whether or not we end up working together. Think of it as a gift to you and your show as a thank you for listening to the podcast. If listening to me here isn't enough and you're ready to take the next step, let's chat. Find the link to book in the show notes. Now back to the good stuff. All right, today's question comes from Tasha. Tasha says, I am trying to get my podcast started and I've been using Audacity to edit. I'm pretty new to audio editing and have hit a bit of a snag with background noise. Even in my quietest room, I can't seem to get rid of a hum or occasional traffic noise from outside. I know there's a noise reduction feature in Audacity, but I'm not quite sure how to use it without making myself sound like I'm underwater. Can you tell me the best way to utilize this feature to clean up my audio? Thanks a ton for all the help and guidance. Yeah, so the underwater thing is very real. The first thing to talk about here is your workflow. So I like to, as soon as I've, imported my track, I always use Levelator first. I'll take that back. I almost always use Levelator first. There are a few of my clients that it doesn't work super well on. Typically, I use Levelator, which is free online, and I get the track leveled, then I import it back into Audacity, and then I will do noise reduction first. Go through your sound check, and then give a few seconds of silence. Sometimes it's best to do, silence at the start, but depending on what microphone you have, you may have some noise canceling. And so you'll, have silence, then you start talking, and then there's a background noise right immediately after you've stopped talking. So I like to do, check 1, check 2, whatever that looks like for you. Have a little bit of silence, and then get your room tone from there. So you'll just highlight that little bit of silence. 5 seconds is great. And that teaches the noise reduction feature what sound it's removing. So it teaches it what your background sound sounds like. Then you highlight the whole thing and actually apply it. I typically don't mess with the settings at all. I think that's where you can get some of that underwater sound, is if you mess with things too much. And I personally find that the standard setting is what I need almost every time. Then go through your normal workflow of equalizing, setting your lofts, everything else. And then, especially after you've normalized, you may see that, once the shape of the audio has changed, new background sound emerges. And at that point, you might run it again with a new noise profile. So you might go through that workflow, see that there is some new sound, highlight that background noise, and then run the noise reduction feature again at that point. So this is always where I'll say what you can do in the production stage is such a gift to yourself for the post-production stage. Anyone who's worked in any kind of filmmaking or recording knows the phrase fix it in post. And it is the audio engineer nightmare fuel. There is no sentence I can think of immediately in the English language that I hate more than fix it in post. And that's because, it's a pinch of prevention is worth a pound of the cure or something like that. I try and use idioms all the time, and I have no idea what any idiom ever is. And I realize that as I'm recording and trying to use them. But anyways, a little tiny bit more attention to maybe hanging up a heavy quilt in front of your window to eliminate the traffic sound. That is so much easier than trying to clean up when a motorcycle does go by. So if there are things that you can do in real time to support capturing better audio, that's my ultimate recommendation. But that's how you use the noise reduction filter, the noise reduction feature. Play around with it, see what works best for you, but try where you can to treat your space first. Thank you so much for writing in. I hope that helps, and let us know when your podcast gets going. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, you can shoot me a DM on Instagram at Sonivia Studios or email me at rue.sonivia@gmail.com. All right, that was a little bit heavy. Shake it off. Know that I'm giving you a hug through your headphones right now because it is hard, and you get tougher the more that you put yourself out there, but it's always going to be hard. And the hard is a sign that you love what you're doing, because if you didn't care about your podcast, you wouldn't care if other people didn't like it. But because it means something to you, it's hard to hear that people don't like it. Be gentle with yourself, go get a little treat, and get back under your headphones. Record a new episode, keep making the dope podcast that you feel called to make. All right, that is it for today. Next week, I will be passing the mic to a very special guest. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, you can follow me on Instagram where the party never stops at Sonivia Studios. You can come hang out with me in my brand new Facebook group, Podcasting Up An Octave. The link for that's in the show notes. It's still pretty small, so that's the best place to get intimate, one-on-one, free support from me. So come hang out over there, help that community grow. We're making some awesome podcasts in there. And I will see you next week. Thank you so much for helping me take podcasting up an octave.